Hey, folks, so we will go ahead and get started to be respectful of your time. It's right at 2 o'clock. So we will do some introductions and do some housekeeping things, and then we'll get further into the presentation today. So thank you for joining us and being a part of the conversation around the current SASP request for applications that was released May 1st. So for some of you, this is the same information, but maybe a couple things that are new. For the flow for today, you all are currently muted. I will ask that if you have questions, you can certainly post those in the chat. I will not address them until we get to the section of questions and Q&A at the end. Also at that time, I will allow you all to talk by pressing the button on my end, and then you all can unmute yourselves if you want to ask your question instead of typing it in the chat box. So, first, for introductions, my name is Deanna Harrington. I am the Director of Member Services and Technical Assistance for NCCASA. I also, as part of my job duties, is to serve and act as the grant manager for the Sexual Assault Service Program grant, or SASP. As we are the pass-through of those funds for this state by the State Administrator Governor's Crime Commission. So I want to give you all the opportunity to introduce yourselves. And so if you'll take a moment and type in the chat your name, your preferred pronouns, and what agency you're with, so we can get a sense of who's on the call with us today. All right, so we have Vicki from A Safe Home for Everyone in Ashe County, she, her, hers. Tanya, also with the Partnership of Ashe. Christy, she, her, options in Burke. Crystal Emmerich with Brave Step, she, her, hers. Meredith, it's actually Claudia, it's not Meredith. She, her, hers. Crossroads. Sue from Interactive Wake County, she, her, hers. Jasmine from Durham Crisis Response Center, she, her, hers. We have Anna from A Safe Home for Everyone in Ashe County, she, her, hers. Abby with Families First, she's filling in for Vicki, but her pronouns are she, her, hers. We have Emily, who is also with DCRC, and she, her pronouns are she, her, hers, and she is the sexual assault advocate. Is there anyone else who wants to take a second and introduce themselves? Okay. Well, it looks like we've got a great mix of folks from across the state and across all of the regions. We've got some rural agencies, some urban programs, and we also have some non-traditional rape crisis centers or other community organizations in attendance. So that's great. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. You should be able to currently see on your screen the PowerPoint presentation. If you're unable to see that, please let me know by typing it in the chat, and I will take a break and stop to address any technical issues that we're having. Right. So just some history of SASP. It was created by the Violence Against Women Act and the Department of Justice Reauthorization Act of 2005. It's the first federally and first and still only federal funding stream solely dedicated to the provision of direct intervention and related assistance to victims of sexual assault. And both NCCASA and Governor's Crime Commission, or GCC, have been collaborating to administer these funds in North Carolina since 2010. These funds were meant to mirror both the direct service funds and Delta project that were for domestic violence services. So SASP was meant to complement the RPE project, which is why when we start talking about allowable and unallowable activities, you'll see prevention education is listed as an unallowable. So what can SASP funding be used to support? So advocacy, so services, assistance, or resources provided to survivors of sexual violence to support them in meeting their goals for healing, safety, and accountability. So some examples could be individual support services, support groups, therapeutic services, case management, accompaniment, and then with whom? Adult, youth, and child victims of sexual assault, and then as well as secondary survivors who were impacted. So here is the list of things that SASP funds cannot be used to support. So training for allied professionals and the community, activities focused on prevention efforts and public education, criminal justice activities, sexual assault response team coordination, sexual assault forensic examination projects, offender treatment services, research projects, domestic violence services, lobbying, fundraising, purchase of real property, construction, physical modifications to buildings, including minor renovations. So what does your organization need to be eligible? So rape crisis centers and other nonprofit, non-governmental organizations or tribal programs that provide direct intervention and related to assistance to sexual assault survivors. For rape crisis centers who are looking to apply, you must be in good standing throughout the current grant cycle, meaning if you're a current grantee, the things that we are looking at to determine good standing are going to be your timely and complete submission of SASP reports, including cost reports, as well as the engagement with NCCASA's technical assistance to support your project, but also just communication around challenges you may be facing, or if there are certain months or deadlines that you're not able to meet. And then, of course, NCCASA membership. For the full list of the organizational eligibility, that can be found at the link at the bottom of the slide, which takes you to our website, which has both the application and the solicitation. So just to create an understanding of the roles in which GCC and NCCASA play with SASP funds, as a pass-through for the state, this pot of money is not a project or a grant that is funded to NCCASA from Governor's Crime Commission. As acting as the pass-through, we are an extension of Governor's Crime Commission, meaning we have to have all the same practices, policies, information in place that Governor's Crime Commission requires for all of their other VAWA dollars, which would be your STOP funds. So GCC, their role in the project is they work with us to submit the application funds to OVW. That application is submitted every year. It's a non-competitive process. It's a complete block grant based on population and multiple other factors every year. And so sometimes we see it go down, sometimes we see an increase. They serve as the administrator for the state. And so what that means is any contact with OVW directly, or when it's time for an audit, they're going to go to GCC office first. And then they would come see us at NCCASA and then trickle down to you all, of course, if there were any red flags or issues. They also work with us to submit the progress reports for the state to the federal government. So our role is we at NCCASA, we create the solicitation. We receive all the applications. We review those to make sure that they are eligible to be able to proceed to the scoring process. Once that happens, we facilitate that process with our multidisciplinary review team. The teams are made up of other collaborators in the work, folks who have experience in the field, and NCCASA staff do participate, one per team, to help kind of manage folks, to fill the gap if there's any questions around doing the work. And then once we facilitate that process and we have all of the final scores, we send that communication out to you all, of those who've applied. So if you receive funding or are going to be, if you're pre-approved, then you would receive an email that says that. If you were not approved, you would receive a letter that lets you know that you were not approved for this year's funding cycle, and gives you the breakdown of your scores in the scoring matrix, which we'll get to later on today, so that you can see where you stand. We then communicate and ask for modifications to those who were recommended for funding. We process and make the grant awards. Once the grant award period begins, we process a monthly reimbursement request. We generate and send those reimbursements into Governor's Crime Commission. We provide programmatic technical assistance and monitoring, financial technical assistance and monitoring, and we also provide the technical assistance for your VAWA reporting. So a couple of things I want to lift up is that I do recognize that you all are submitting an application for a time that is very unknown. With the pandemic, we don't know what services are going to look like. We don't know the delivery options that are going to be in place. And so that also means TA is going to look different. Site visits, desk monitoring, all those things are going to look different. And so I just wanted to lift that up so that you all know that we are in this with you all, and figuring out what this looks like in this collaborative process between grantor and grantee. So the SASP applications are going to be due June 12th at 5 p.m. and you will email them to deanna@nccasa.org. NCCASA staff is still currently working remotely, and so for that reason, I really want to implore you all to make as many notes to yourself as possible. That email submission is going to be the way to submit your application. If you mail it, I will not be able to get that mail. So please, please, please write as many notes to yourself as you need to that reminds you that everything should be emailed to me. The awards are going to be based on previous year's estimates, which is the 22,167, and we fund up to 21 eligible organizations. Eligible meaning the things we've discussed in previous slides, in addition to your scoring, which applicants have to score a 70 or above in order to be considered eligible for funding. This is a switch. In previous years, some of you may be aware in your interaction with this grant that we have had different fiscal years a couple of different times through this essential 10-year process. One of the things that we identified over the last year and a half with NCCASA working as the pass-through and us trying to problem solve and create solutions to the lack of to the delayed reimbursement process and opening of the award is that several years ago when GCC was acting alone as the state administrator and we were not passing through, they moved this grant to a October 1 to September 30th deadline. These funds on a federal level are actually on a calendar year. So in order to potentially mitigate some financial issues for grantees, we made the decision for this fiscal year to move to the grant period of January 1, 2021 to December 30th of 2021. This means you'll only submit one progress report. It will be for the entire year, and we'll be back on the cycle that matches the timing in which those funds are released to the state. If you have questions about that, of course, you can place them in the chat, or when we get to Q&A, and when you're unmuted, ask them. But our hope is that this makes this process a little easier for you all as you think about, of course, your allocation plan for the year and the staggering of different grants that you have starting at different periods. But we hope that this is for the better, and we'll see what happens, and continue to get feedback from folks about the challenges of that time frame and the things that they found to be helpful. So again, the application can be downloaded at our website, which is the link at the bottom of the slide. So our priorities this year are the same as last year. So we ask that folks choose one of the two grant priorities: innovative support services or improving accessible services for marginalized and underserved communities. And just a reminder that the priority has to be reflected throughout your grant application. So first, we're going to talk about examples of innovative support services. And so these are things like animal or horticulture therapy, dance or body movement therapies, music therapy, yoga, somatic experiencing, tapping, meditation, all of those other kind of pieces related to holistic healing. The link at the bottom of the slide has more examples of holistic healing practices. It's not all inclusive. So you all may have things that you feel like are holistic to the community that you serve, that you're looking to continue and want to use this funding for. It can be used for traditional talk therapy. But we're particularly interested in if you're using modalities such as EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, as a service for sexual violence survivors. Okay. So this is examples or list of communities who have been marginalized and underserved. This is not an all-inclusive list, so please note that. These are just some examples. So African Americans, Latinx population, LGBTQ+ folks, Native Americans, elders, homeless, teens, individuals with developmental disabilities. Again, the list is much more extensive than this. These were just some examples that I pulled for folks as you're thinking about the gaps that you see in your community, right? And so when approaching writing a grant, you shouldn't be approaching it just to receive funding because you need funding. You should be approaching it because you've seen a gap in your community in services and you want to fill it. And so these may be some of the populations that you are missing, or that you've seen an increase in sexual violence being reported or experienced. So just kind of, you think of that perspective as you're working on your application. So we're just going to go through each of the application sections really quickly. I'll spend a little time on things that are new this year to the process, and less time on things that have been the same. So the first page really is for you to just place all of your identifying information and choose which one, which area you're applying for. If you're applying for improving accessible services for communities who've been marginalized and underserved, you need to tell us what that community or communities are going to be that your project is focusing on. There is space for you to have a continuation project. So for some of you, you may currently be funded by SASP during this fiscal year, and you're looking to continue that work. And so you would check yes here. If you decided that that project isn't something that you no longer see a need for, or you figured out another way to sustain it outside of these funds, and you're looking for SASP to do something else, then you would say no, and then you would apply. It's a new project, right? So it's a continued project, new project. It's not based on if the agency is a continued grantee or a new grantee. You'll also check the box that best describes your agency, if you provide direct intervention and related assistance to SA survivors, and then if you provide services to victims of all ages. Child advocacy centers are not eligible to apply for SASP funding. However, SASP dollars can be used to work with those under the age of 18. Some operational pieces: if you've been in operation since July 1 of 2019 and continue to be in operation, do you have a current charitable solicitation license? We're not asking that you provide that at the time of your application submission, but it will be asked of you after you are pre-approved. For any folks who apply as a brand new organization, just so you all know, as the pass-through in working in tandem with the State Administrator of Governor's Crime Commission, any new grantees are automatically considered high risk for the first year that they are funded, because we are not familiar with who you are. And so what that means is we may ask more questions related to your application. If it's been pre-approved, we may ask for more documentation and potentially come and do a visit in person, just so that we start to feel like we have a sense of your capacity to do the work. And then after that first year, and the risk starts to come down, then you come off of the high risk list, but just so folks are aware. So if your agency has any of these policies in place that you see here on this screen, you are not eligible for funding. These things have been found to compromise the safety of survivors, and also make it increasingly difficult for survivors to access services. So if you do have those policies and procedures, that's okay. That's who you are as an organization. We unfortunately just are not able to fund you at this time. Fundamental elements of accessibility. So again, you're going to look at this list and check all the things that apply. If you have a box that you did not check, it will not disqualify you for funding. But what it will mean is if you're pre-approved, part of your modification period we'll be talking about how do we get you in a place where that particular element of your agency and work can be accessible to all those who need services. So now we're going to talk about the project narrative. And so this is for all applicants to fill out. You're going to have your problem statement. So what are you looking to address? What is the problem you see facing sexual violence survivors in your community? And why did you decide to prioritize these particular issues? Here we're looking for not only your anecdotal information, but also any data that you have that can support your particular request. And so we would like for that data to be state or local if you can. National data is great. However, it doesn't necessarily give us a sense of what things look like in your community. Project activities, and so what activities are you going to do and complete in order to address this problem? So again, all of it flows. And then your timeline, so you'll see again that our timeline is from January to December. And so you'll go through here and talk about those project activities. What is the time frame in which you're going to complete them over the 12-month grant period? So this part is new. So I'm going to do some stop sharing and resharing of different screens, so bear with me. But we're going to talk about the project goal. So what positive changes will you accomplish through this project? What will be different? Goals should be reflective of the SMARTY approach. So for folks who are familiar with the SMART approach, it includes that with 2 additional factors, right? So specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. So I'm going to click on the link that will take you all to an example of SMARTY goals. And if for any reason you cannot see the new screen that says the Management Center at the top, please let me know in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone, so I'll go ahead and move forward. So this screen or worksheet kind of breaks down this more specifically. Oh, wait, I may have spoke too soon. Okay, can't see it. All right, I'm going to stop my share for just a second and then open a different screen for you so you can see it. All right, you all should now be able to see it. Perfect. Okay. So, of course, there are the definitions for what are the traditional SMART goals. So, strategic, and it reflects an important dimension of what your organization seeks to accomplish. It's measurable, so it has standards by which reasonable people can agree on whether the goal has been met. It's challenging enough that achievement would mean significant progress, so a stretch for the organization. It's realistic, so it's not so challenging as to indicate lack of thought about resources or execution. It's easy to track and worth the time and energy to do so. It has a clear deadline. And this is where we get to the added pieces. Inclusive. It brings traditionally communities that have been marginalized or people that have been marginalized and those most impacted into processes, activities, and decision policy making in a way that shares power. Equitable, it includes an element of fairness or justice that seeks to address systematic injustice, inequity, or oppression. So we're going to go, I'm going to stop this share and go back to the slides. So here's an example of a SMART goal turned SMARTY. So a SMART goal for an organization may be they want to build a volunteer team of 100 door-to-door canvassers by May. A SMARTY reflection of that or extension of that would be with at least 10 people of color recruited as volunteer leaders first, so they can help shape the way that the Canvas is run. Oops, I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide. It'll let me. There we go. And talk about performance measures. Again, if you have questions around this SMARTY concept and what does that look like and how do you put that into practice, into writing, we'll have our Q&A at the end, but we're also available to continue to ask for you all to be able to ask questions and get answers between now and when your application is due. So again, the more you sit on this, the more you may think like, oh, I didn't think of this particular question. And once you go to write it, it may be a very different experience. I also want to be really clear, right? Like, writing this goal around inclusiveness and being equitable, the ideal would to be not to create further harm. And so if you feel like your organization could not do that in a way that would not create harm for those who have been marginalized and underserved, then talk to me, let me know, because that may mean you're not ready, right? And you're at a different place in this application than other folks. So I also want to make space for that, right? Like, I don't want folks to just put something down for inclusive and equitable and work towards that without taking a step back to truly decide what does that mean for their organization and how they operate. I don't want it to be just a checkbox for folks. So, performance measures. How will you know that you have achieved this or these goals? What numbers, stories, narratives, etc. will you keep track of to measure your progress? So here's where you'll tell me, you know, if you say we're going to see an increase in the number of folks who, LGBTQ folks who come for services, that's great. You can provide me with that percentage, but I need to know like your base number, right? And so that I too can know like you're moving towards progress. Of course, you can use qualitative and anecdotal pieces around performance measures. You know, those are just as important as the number of folks that you serve. Impact really makes a difference. And so really balancing that intention versus impact piece here. Okay, here's the example again. So in continuing the project narrative, we're going to talk about partners. And so this is a section that every year I think folks kind of struggle with. Hold on, let me pull up the chat. Abby, I'm not sure what that is. Oh, okay. It's okay. All right. So in the past, what we've seen from grantees is that they send us their traditional MOUs for their Council for Women or their VOCA basic projects. And that's not what we're looking for here. What we're looking for are MOUs that are specific to the SASP project you're submitting, right? And so it could be that agency is a partner with you, let's say, related to criminal justice response, right? And that is an MOU you submit for your Council for Women. We need a different MOU that talks specifically about this partnership. The other MOU will not suffice. And so I just ask that you all like pay attention to that, take lots of notes around that. We don't need documentation for all your community partners. If you have community partners who want to support you and submit a letter of support, that's fine. It won't necessarily have anything to do with your scoring matrix or impact that in any way. The MOU is really what we're looking for. So we're going to talk about two new things that we did this year, or for this request for applications. So in terms of partnership, so for rape crisis centers who are with us today, if you're applying to improving access for underserved, for communities who've been underserved and marginalized, you must demonstrate a history of equitable partnership with an agency in the community who's representative of that population through an MOU. While it's not mandatory to list these agencies as a contractor, agencies are strongly encouraged to consider. So some questions I got the first grant writing webinar last week were around, what if in our community there's not an agency that is specifically focusing on those individuals? Or what if they're more grassroots and they're not organized as a nonprofit? Can we still list them as a partner and work with them? Absolutely. You won't be able to give funding to them as a contractor. However, having them participate and be a part of the project is still really impactful. So if you're in a community where you don't have a culturally specific agency who's doing work with the population that you're looking to serve, you can still submit your application to do so. In the MOU section, we just need you to articulate that. And part of your ongoing process with your project would be, how does your community help to create space for that particular type of organization to exist? So that's the note I want to make for rape crisis centers. For other community organizations who aren't rape crisis centers, if you're applying to improving access for marginalized and underserved communities, you then also must have an MOU with the local rape crisis center and plan for referral for services your agency does not provide. If there are barriers to this partnership, please reach out to me so we can talk about it. Same thing for rape crisis centers. If there are barriers to that relationship and you want to talk about it, feel free to reach out to me. Again, this is a new piece to the application. It came out of some discussion with previous reviewers, as well as some of you all who wanted to understand more specifically what did this mean and how it impacted the scoring matrix. So we do want a glimpse of your current sexual assault services. Of course, this feedback is not used or will make you ineligible for the funding, but we do want to hear and get a sense of kind of what your capacity has been in the past, and how you're continuing to kind of build comprehensive and accessible services. So current services your agency provides, how many SA clients you served last year, not specific to that grant project, to the SASP grant project, but in general, all sexual assault survivors. When you submit your data for this, please break it down. So if there's sexual assault survivors who, similar to how you do your Council for Women data, if it's in the context of a relationship, whether it's a married couple or it's a boyfriend, spouse, partner, please break those numbers down so we can get a sense of what sexual assault clients you're seeing if you're a dual agency. Please provide current and specific demographic information around the folks you currently serve. So again, just race, ethnicity, age, all of those general kind of demographics that give us a sense of who you are seeing already in your community. And then space around how do you engage survivors for feedback on your agency? And did it impact the planning for this project? So really engaging with folks who are receiving services to be able to speak into the services that are then provided to other folks in your community, or even to just them one-on-one. We don't know if it's working unless a survivor tells us it's working. And so being mindful of how you incorporate things that they share with you all about their experiences is something we really value. Okay, so this section here is only for continuation projects. So continuation projects, you will fill out all of the other pieces of the application we just discussed. In addition, you will fill out and answer these questions, okay? So for how long have you received the SASP funding for this particular project? Your previous project outcomes, so what positive things did you accomplish? What are the things that you anticipate seeing by the end of the current project year, knowing that you're submitting an application when the fiscal year isn't over? Lessons learned. So what have you learned? How are you going to take that information to build on the lessons and modify how you provide these services or structure your project? Okay, so next we're going to talk about budget. Before we do that, I am going to just take a second to pull up the scoring matrix for folks so that you get a sense of what we are looking at and the questions we ask the scorers to contemplate in their review. Right, so you all should now be able to see the full announcement from our website. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom where the scoring matrix can be located. So here we go. So we have a matrix that we use for new projects and a matrix that we use for continuation. So here you'll see the things, the main areas we look at, the points that are assigned to those areas, and the questions that we use to frame thinking about those areas that we're asked to look at. So with logic and clarity, is it clear what you intend to do? Do your project activities address the problem or need? Do you display insight and understanding of the community's needs, including like a positive problem-solving stance? Are your activities allowable under SASP? Is the project clearly focused on sexual assault service provision and recognizes the difference between what service provision looks like between domestic violence and sexual assault and the unique needs of that population? Evidence and problem of need for project. So this is 20 points. Is the need clearly established and demonstrated throughout the application? Is it specific to the community being served? Will these funds be used to address a gap that wouldn't be addressed if you didn't receive these funds? Potential for positive impact. To what extent, which is 25 points. To what extent will this make SA services stronger and more accessible? What kind of impact will it have on citizens in respective communities? Is it a good fit to address the most pressing needs communicated in the application? Is it a good reason to believe that this kind of program will be effective? Has the agency demonstrated their commitment to equity and inclusion through the goals they identified? Any potential to create further harm in a community or to a survivor? Is there good reason to believe that the agency has the readiness and capacity to implement the proposed project? Do you have attached job descriptions that make sense for the project and that are listed in the grant application? Is sexually assault specifically mentioned as part of the roles listed in the job description? For folks who apply for the priority of improving accessible services for communities who've been marginalized and underserved, does the application express a clear plan for making service provided through this grant accessible and relevant? For innovative services, is the agency providing adequate and appropriate basic services? Given the services currently offered, does the prioritization of this particular project make sense? Program goals and measures are 15 points. Do the goals directly relate to the needs identified in the description of the problem? Are the goals both aspirational yet realistic for a year-long project? And do the performance measures make sense given the activities and goals, and are they realistic? Community collaboration is 15 points. Does the proposal clearly state how the agency will collaborate with others to improve the overall response to victims? What are the results that relationship is expected to achieve and through the project? Do the agencies that are being prioritized make sense with the purpose and goals of the project? What's the nature of that current relationship? And then again, for folks who are applying under the priority of improving services for communities who've been marginalized and underserved, does the application identify one or more agencies that provide culturally specific services, support, community connection, and or organizing opportunities with and for the communities that they seek to prioritize with this project? Does the plan for engagement with that agency display appropriate respect for their time, current work, and expertise? What are their current collaborative relationships like? And then the budget and budget justification. Are the costs included allowable given the guidance? And then is the proposed budget and budget justification feasible, logical, reasonable, and appropriate? So the next is the continuation projects. So there's some variance in points, and there's some difference in questions, but it's very similar to the things that I just showed you all for new projects. So I just, again, wanted to take a second and show you all visually what that is in case you had questions about how many points per section. Because that's not something we clearly identify on the application. All right, so I'm going to stop this share. The next thing I'm going to share with you as we transition into budget is the actual application. And the reason is because there is a piece in there connected to your budget that I want you all to be able to pay specific attention to. All right. Okay. So you should all now see the application. I'm going to scroll down to the budget section. Okay. So what I want to draw your attention to is the section I'm going to highlight for you. Sorry about that. I don't know why it just closed on y'all. We're going to try that again. Okay. So at the beginning of your budget section, you'll see a heading with some information about completing the budget form. Again, the things listed in here are examples or suggestions. You can leave lines blank. You can insert things that you think are relevant to your project that maybe don't fit into the categories currently listed. So the highlighted piece is what I want to cover for folks. And so this is new for this year. Please note that if your agency is a dual or multi-service agency or organization and your project will benefit clients in all programs, SASP cannot be used to cover 100% of those service delivery costs. Agencies must show in the budget narrative what percentage SASP would be charged and the data/reasoning that led to this decision and what tools you'll use to be shown to the grant manager during the site visit to justify these costs. This is something new we added based on conversations with Governor's Crime Commission and our OVW contact to make it very clear for folks that we know there's an intersection and for agencies to operate in silos does not make sense. And so therefore, you may have a program that is benefiting trauma survivors in general, right? If it's a therapy program or a particular yoga practice or whatever it might be. And that is amazing. While at the same time, we have to be mindful that SASP can't cover 100% of that if folks are in those spaces whose presenting issue was not around sexual violence. So I just wanted to lift that up for folks. Of course, I know folks are going to have questions. Again, you can save them at the end, or you can talk to me offline if that is more comfortable for you. What I will also say is that, you know, in thinking through what it would look like, I'm available for you to talk to and think about what things would you have in practice, what tools, because as an agency, that's not something potentially another funder has ever asked you to do, right? And so we recognize we may be asking you to do something you haven't done before. And so we want to be able to work with you and this not be a hindrance for you to complete your application. The other thing I will say while we're talking about cost allocation of SASP is just a reminder to folks, particularly for those of you who do your finances or for those who don't but are communicating this information to finance because they're creating your budget. SASP requires a cost allocation plan, meaning you cannot spend 100% of SASP funds on anything that is going to benefit the whole agency, right? So your overhead costs, such as rent, utilities, your copy and printer, your office supplies, those things cannot be charged 100% to SASP. So what I hear sometimes from folks is, well, I'm going to spend all of my SASP money in this particular line, which is why I'm charging this much this month. And once that's finished and I'm out of that money, I'm going to start charging another funding source. That is not allowed. So making sure you all really take that into consideration as you're planning your budget for the grant, but also your entire fiscal year. All right, so the budget section. So you'll see here, we've got personnel listed, space for fringe and FICA. We ask that folks let us know the percentage of time each personnel item that's listed. Please give us their percentage of time they're going to be on the project. Contractual, so a note that we can't exceed the federal rate. And so go ahead and put those folks in there. You do not have to have a completed contract with them in order and send that in order to list them here in your budget. We do recognize that if you don't get this grant, you're not going to have that contract, right? And so it may be something that you're not going to put in writing and be bound to here in the beginning when you don't even know if you're getting the funding. By the time your award begins, of course, that's information we're going to have and ask for. Travel cost. And so this includes travel for staff for trainings, traveling to visit clients and do mobile advocacy, any client transportation you provide, so in-state mileage, bus passes, taxi passes, any of those things can be utilized. We still are not allowed to use gas cards, unfortunately. I know that's a common question, so I just wanted to put that out there. But all of your travel will be in this section. And supplies and operating. So in the supplies and operating section, you've got your promotional materials, office supplies, copier, printer, postage, communications, rent, utilities, audit, insurance, dues and memberships, and emergency client costs. Again, this is an area where we want to see the money spread around between multiple funding sources because it benefits your whole agency. And your allocation should make sense into the percent of time that the staff spends on the project. So it's based on the FTEs for each time period or pay period during the grant process. So for emergency client costs, you all can lump that into one thing, or you can choose to break it down into multiple things that you know are possible things that come up in serving sexual assault survivors. So like if it's, you know, a locksmith to get locks changed because the survivor was sexually assaulted in their home, and like that's part of their safety, emotional safety plan is the locks being changed. It could include helping them move, food, help with paying bills. So those pieces. And so similar to Counsel for Women, I'm going to encourage you to at least put some money there so that if and when you run into those costs, you have it in your budget, and you can always add to that line item as the grant progresses. So equipment is anything over $1,000. So if you're purchasing laptops for staff who are on this project, anything like that can go under your supplies and operating. And then down here at the bottom will be your total projections, and we've listed the per diem and mileage reimbursement rates for you all. So next is the budget justification. So your personnel positions, what's listed there. Make sure we have those job descriptions as the email attachments, that they're relevant. Job descriptions are relevant to the project and match what the project says folks will be doing. Your contract positions, what role will they play? While we do not ask to have your contract, we do ask that you include a job description for the contracted position. So just give us a brief job description of what they'll be doing for your project as an email attachment. Your travel budget, so your purpose and benefit of the travel that's listed in your budget. Your supplies and operating, what's the purpose of the items listed in that category or area as it's related to your project. Friendly reminder, food and beverages are unallowable expenses. And then your equipment budget, what is the purpose of items listed in this category and how it relates to your project. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint and so we've talked about these sections. So here's the review and selection process, which we've talked about already. So folks who, applicants that don't meet the requirements, have unallowable projects, and incomplete or late applications will not be scored, so they'll automatically be removed. Applications are, again, reviewed by the MDRT teams. The selection criteria that we just reviewed, again, is in this announcement, which is on our website. And then we will notify applicants of their pre-approval by August 1st of 2020. And after that, then folks will be asked to begin the modification process so that we can begin to be ready for the contract grant award period, which would start January 1. Okay, so now is the time for questions. So, whoops. So what I'm going to do is go in and allow each of you to unmute yourself. You also can ask questions in the chat. I do want to let folks know that this webinar has been recorded, continues to be recorded. So if there are questions you'd prefer to not have recorded and you want to talk offline, feel free to do that. You can hold off. If I also say that so that you know that you all will receive a link to the PowerPoint, but also to the webinar, which takes about 24 hours to upload onto our cloud. So you all are now able to talk. If you want to unmute yourself, excuse me, and ask questions or place those questions in the chat. So I'm going to make some space and be really quiet while you all think on it.
Deanna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. I came in a little late because I had a staff meeting. So you may have covered this at the beginning. So please, if that's the case, we can maybe connect offline. But
Okay.
In thinking about planning our deliverables for next year, you know, I'm kind of, as I'm thinking about planning for next year, I'm kind of trying to manage expectations about what we might be able to accomplish in terms of in-person services.
Yes.
And
as are we.
Okay, great. So knowing that we are, you know, we would be applying as a continuation project, we, you know, we may not have, would it be acceptable to have deliverables that maybe come in a little bit lower than the threshold of what we contracted for in this past year?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that, so not only NCCASA, but also the reviewers have been instructed to think about reviewing differently this year because of COVID-19. And so, and what that means is thinking through just what you suggested, right? I also want to say, like, anytime there's a continuation project, right? Like, you may lessen, I'm so sorry, my cat just said hello to you all. Just, you may lessen your expectations based on what you figure out is your actual capacity, right? So one of the things we've been talking about at NCCASA a lot is impact versus productivity, right? And so I'm not as fixated on how many people receive the service as I am on the impact the service made on them and their lives and survivorship. So I encourage you all to think about that and lean into that conversation as you're preparing your applications. I can't say to folks, you know, you should be prepared to do everything virtually or in person, because we just don't know what it's going to look like. Right. But what I can say to folks is write it the way that feels right for you and your agency right now. And if you're funded and something happens, we will make adjustments requests just like we did this year.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. That's very helpful.
You're welcome. I'm assuming that was Rachel.
Yes, it was.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts folks have? That's a great question that Rachel presented to the group. So thank you for doing that. Okay, it's quiet in the chat and no one's talking. So I assume that that means at this current moment you don't have questions. You may have them offline later on as you reflect, after you get the recording and you listen again and think of things that you, or hear things that you may have missed the first time. I've listed my contact information here for folks, so it's different than last year in the SASP email address. As you all know, Madison is using that email account, and so she primarily focuses on current grantees. And so to not overload her inbox, we decided for folks to send their applications to me this year. If speaking via phone is better for you and your question, and you are Zoom burnt out, virtual space burnt out, you always can email me and let me know you actually want to have a phone call, and I can contact you from the agency cell phone that I have at my house currently. I appreciate you all taking time to sit in and learn more about the opportunity around SASP, and what the process is like, whether you apply this year or years to come. And I just really encourage you all to reach out to ask whatever questions you need between now and June 12th. And I appreciate you folks. I know it's been a very difficult time for all of us in different ways. And so I'm so grateful to be in community with folks who are continuing to look out for the well-being of others, and putting others before our own individual selves in a way that is thoughtful and grounded in the humanity of who we are. And so just thank you for all that you're continuing to do to survive with survivors, with everything that's happening in the world. It's more important than ever. So I hope that you all have a great rest of the week. And I look forward to seeing your questions and hopefully your applications. I'll talk to you all soon. Take care.